The office was a theater of shadows and blue light glare, a space where time seemed to coagulate rather than flow. Elias sat at the center of this sterile kingdom, his fingers poised over the keyboard, yet his mind was 1,000 miles away, drifting through the corridors of a conversation that had ended 3 weeks ago. On his screen, an email thread, his professional lifeline, remained dormant. No reply, no movement, no resolution. Outside the window, the city pulsed with the indifference of a vast, breathing organism. Rain streaked the glass in jagged, weeping lines, blurring the neon geometry of the skyline. Elias felt the familiar, cold ache of stagnation in his chest, a heavy, leaden pressure he had come to associate with his career. He was a man playing the game of life, as if it were a hand-to-hand combat match, his knuckles white with the strain of holding on to a narrative of neglect. He felt that his success was being held hostage by the silence of a single client, that his prosperity was being gated by the stubbornness of another human being. He was not merely waiting for an email. He was waiting for the universe to grant him permission to breathe. He was the sentinel of his own frustration, guarding a gate that led to a kingdom he had convinced himself he could not enter. He viewed his life as a series of skirmishes. This client was an adversary, that contract was a fortress, and his own rising bank balance was the captured territory he was losing in a long, drawn-out siege. The paradox was as sharp as a razor's edge. The harder he fought to secure his supply, the further it retreated into the fog. He was exhausting his vital spirits in a war of one, completely oblivious to the fact that the battlefield did not exist. The air in the room was stale, thick with the unvoiced accusations he hurled at the empty space. He believed he was defending his territory, but in truth, he was merely building a prison of his own design, brick by brick, grudge by grudge, while the true architecture of abundance waited patiently for the battle to end. Why do men persist in the belief that life is a siege? To answer this, one must peer into the dark mechanics of the human psyche, the subtle, persistent architecture of resistance. When the individual perceives life as a battle, they are fundamentally declaring that the world is a place of finite resources. This is the primal, subterranean assumption, that there is only one pot, and if someone else is holding a spoon, the individual is inherently disadvantaged. This is the great error of the ego. The ego thrives on separation. It requires a protagonist and an antagonist to define its own existence. By framing an interaction as a conflict, by casting another as the one who owes, the one who blocks, or the one who denies, the individual grants that person absolute, godlike power over their own destiny. If you believe a client holds the key to your success, you have implicitly relegated yourself to the status of a petitioner. You have surrendered your sovereignty to a shadow. But consider the why of this mechanism. Why do we cling to this victimhood? Because it is, in a perverse sense, comfortable. To be the victim is to be absolved of the responsibility of creation. If the delay in your fortune is the fault of the client, then you are not responsible for your lack. You are not a master who has failed to calibrate your frequency. You are a martyr who has been wronged. It is a seductive cage. It protects the ego from the terrifying, exhilarating truth that the external world is a mere projection of the internal state. The how of this deconstruction requires a radical realignment of perception. We must recognize that the adversary is not an entity standing in your way. They are an entity reflecting your current vibration back to you. If your internal state is one of "I am being denied," the universe, in its absolute, unblinking neutrality, must provide a mirror image of that denial. The how is found in the cessation of the fight. The spiritual law of non-resistance does not mean passivity. It means the total withdrawal of your emotional investment from the conflict. It is the recognition that the supply you seek is not traveling through the person you resent. It is traveling through the law, and the person is merely a temporary conduit or a distraction. By obsessing over the conduit, You ensure that the supply remains stuck in the bottleneck of your own resentment. You are trying to move a mountain by shouting at the pebbles. In the ancient, misty hills of a forgotten province, there lived a merchant named Kyle. Kyle was a man of great ambition, but even greater suspicion. He traveled to the great banquet of the Valia, legendary gathering, where the gods were said to distribute the bounty of the harvest. The tables were endless, stretching beyond the horizon, groaning under the weight of fruits, golden grains, and jars of celestial honey. Kale sat at the table with a small, rusted iron bowl. Beside him sat a man he had once trusted in business, a man who had, in Kale's estimation, cheated him out of a fortune years prior. As the feast began, Kale did not eat. He did not reach for the golden bread or the flowing wine. Instead, he spent his time watching the man beside him. He noted how the man laughed, how he filled his plate, how he shared wine with strangers. Kale's jaw tightened. Every time the man reached for a succulent fruit, Kale felt the phantom pain of his own lost gold. He spent the entire duration of the feast rehearsing the arguments he would one day use to reclaim his debt. He pointed a finger at the man, his eyes burning with the fires of righteous indignation. When the music died and the sun set, the banquet vanished into thin air, as all such celestial illusions do. The man beside him rose, his stomach full, his spirit light, and walked off into the dusk. Kale sat alone at the empty table, his iron bowl still empty, his hunger fiercer than before. He had spent the banquet proving to himself that he was right to be angry, that he was the aggrieved party, that his lack was justified. He had possessed the right to be angry, and in that right, he had found his ruin. He had been surrounded by infinite supply, yet he had starved to death because he was too busy guarding his bowl from a ghost. He had treated the banquet as a battlefield, and in the war, the harvest had been trampled underfoot. The lesson is as crystalline as a winter star. Your supply is not found in the vindication of your grievances. It is found in the release of them. You must stop looking at your bank account, your career, or your relationships through the lens of a ledger that needs to be balanced. The universe does not keep a ledger of who owes you what. It only keeps a ledger of what you are currently vibrating. If you are vibrating I am owed, you are vibrating I do not have. And the law, being perfect, must keep you in a state of not having. Take this moment to pause. If you are feeling the weight of these words, if you feel the sting of a grudge you've been nursing, know that this is the first step toward your true power. Acknowledge that the battle you are fighting is a distraction, a phantom limb that causes you to limp when you were born to run. Like this video to seal this intention, declare that the war is over and the era of the Master Creator has begun. To apply this, look today at the person you blame for your lack. Do not try to force a conversation or resolve the issue outwardly. Simply look at them in your mind's eye and say, I release the debt. My supply does not come from you. It comes from the source. Feel the tension in your shoulders, that phantom armor you've been wearing begin to melt. You are not losing by letting go. You are finally clearing the channel through which your true wealth must arrive. But wait, if the battlefield is an illusion, then what lies beneath the fog? If we are no longer fighting for our place, then who or what are we actually becoming? We have cleared the air, but the wind has not yet begun to blow in our direction. We must now turn our gaze toward the hidden mechanism that runs the entire operation, the secret, invisible law of circulation that dictates exactly how the universe returns your energy to you. We move now from the battlefield to the very movement of the cosmos itself. Join us in the next chapter as we explore the law of circulation and why the most dangerous thing you can do is to stop the flow of your own good. High in the rugged peaks of the northern range, a singular, pristine mountain lake sits cradled in stone. It is fed by the tireless weeping of a glacier, a constant, crystal-clear stream that descends with purpose. The water enters the lake, vibrant and oxygenated, and then exits on the opposite bank, cascading down into the valley below to nourish the forests. The lake is never full, yet it is never empty. It is a living, breathing participant in the cycle of the heights. Now, imagine a different fate, a basin of water cut off from the stream, a pool where the inlet is blocked and the outlet is choked with debris. It remains trapped, motionless, and heavy under the stagnant sun. The water grows murky, the life within it begins to fade, and what was once a source of refreshment becomes a stagnant trap of its own boundaries. So it is with the human spirit and the flow of abundance. The individual who operates under the assumption of personal hoarding, who clutches their time, their affection, and their resources with a desperate, white-knuckled grip, is that stagnant pool. They watch the world with suspicion, fearful that if they give, they will be left with nothing. They see wealth, opportunity, and kindness as limited commodities that must be guarded, not currents that must be navigated. They are blind to the paradox of the natural order. The hand that stays tightly closed to protect what it holds is the very hand that renders itself incapable of receiving anything new. The flow of the universe is not a storage unit, it is a river, and the moment you attempt to dam it for your own perceived security, you find yourself presiding over a dry bed. What is the true nature of the law of circulation, and why does the psyche recoil from its demands? At its core, the law of circulation posits that the universe is governed by a rhythm of ebb and flow, an energetic inhalation and exhalation. To exist is to participate in this motion. The principle is absolute. You can only keep what you give away, and you can only receive what you are willing to circulate. Why does the human mind struggle with this? It is the ancestral fear of the void. We are conditioned by a materialist paradigm that equates possession with safety and expenditure with loss. If I give away my time, it is gone. If I give away my money, it is reduced. This is the logic of the closed loop. However, the spiritual reality is one of an open system. How, then, does the psyche transition from a closed system to an open one? It begins with the recursive inquiry into the source of supply. If you believe your supply comes from a specific employer, a specific client, or a specific inheritance, you are tethered to a finite source. When you perceive the source as finite, you inevitably hoard. But if you inquire deeper asking, what is the nature of the energy I am hoarding? You discover it is merely fear masquerading as prudence. The how of circulation is the courageous act of releasing what you fear losing. Consider the mechanism of energy. Energy that is blocked transmutes into decay. The psychological burden of hoarding, whether it be money, grudges, or stagnant effort, creates a psychic friction. This friction acts as a literal barrier, a wall of electromagnetic dissonance that prevents the flow of new, fresh, and abundant experiences from entering your reality. You are effectively telling the universe, I am full, I have no room for more, by refusing to let go of what you have. To circulate is to demonstrate faith that you are connected to an inexhaustible spring. By letting go, you are not creating a vacuum. You are creating the necessary space for the incoming tide. The universe abhors a vacuum. It will rush to fill the space you have opened with the exact quality of energy you have released. In a bustling city of trade, there lived a master merchant named Silas. Silas had become famous for his collection of silver massive, ornate coins that he kept in a vault beneath his counting house. His obsession with his hoard was legendary. He spent his days polishing the coins and his nights guarding the heavy iron door of his treasury. He grew gaunt and pale, his eyes darting to every passing stranger, as if they were thieves coming to pilfer his peace. He refused to pay his workers a fair wage, he refused to invest in new ventures, and he certainly refused to offer a single coin to the local orphanage. He was the most secure man in the city, yet he was the most hollow. One evening, a wandering sage visited Silas. The sage carried a simple wooden staff and a hollow gourd for water. He watched Silas counting his silver and asked, "Silas, why does the air in this vault feel so thick, as if it has not been breathed in an age?" Silas scoffed, "It is the scent of security, old man. I am wealthy because I keep what is mine." The sage smiled and led Silas to the town square, where a public well stood. "Watch," the sage said, and he dropped his gourd into the well. He pulled it up, full of cool, sweet water, and poured it out onto the parched earth, where a small tree was struggling to grow. He did this again and again. "The well never runs dry," the sage noted. "But if I were to cork this well, if I were to wall it off, to save the water for myself, the water would turn stagnant and bitter within a week. The well's value is not in the water it holds, but in the water it gives." Silas returned to his vault, and for the first time, he saw not a hoard of safety, but a prison of stagnant water. He realized that his life had been a closed well. The next morning, he began to pay his workers double. He funded a new trade route that benefited the entire city. He released his silver back into the currents of the market. Within a year, his vault was empty of coins, but his counting house was filled with the vibrant, rushing energy of 1,000 new connections, projects, and opportunities. He had stopped being a stagnant pool and had become a river. The wealth did not leave him, it moved through him, and in that movement, it grew 100-fold. The practice of circulation is the practice of intentional movement. To embody this today, you must identify one area of your life where you have become a stagnant pool. Where are you holding on? Not because you need to, but because you fear the absence of the thing you hold. It might be the emotional energy you withhold from a relationship, the money you refuse to invest in your own growth, or the ideas you keep hidden because you fear they will be stolen. Release it. If you have been tight with your appreciation, express it freely. If you have been withholding a donation of time or resource, give it with a spirit of abundance. Understand that you are not losing, you are testing the law. You are proving that you are a channel, not a container. Subscribe to this channel to join our growing collective, as we commit to the daily practice of circulating our highest energy and calling in the harvest of our true potential. As you release these things into the flow, do not track the immediate return as if you are a debt collector. Keep your focus on the movement itself. Observe how your spirit lightens. Observe how the sudden, unexpected synchronicity begins to appear in your life. A message from an old friend, a sudden resolution to a problem that seemed immovable, a new creative spark. This is the law reacting to your motion. But what if, even as you begin to move, there are unseen barriers? What if you are opening your hands, yet you find that you are still anchored to people, places, or beliefs that seek to drain your newfound flow? We have learned to release the things we hold, but what about the things that hold us? In the next chapter, we descend into the very architecture of your resentments, to those invisible, rusted chains that remain long after you have decided to be free. We shall confront the ghosts of your past and learn how to dismantle the mental courtrooms where your prosperity goes to die. In the silent, vaulted chambers of the human mind, there exists a place that resembles an ancient, dust-choked courthouse. The air is heavy with the scent of stagnant ink and crumbling parchment. Here, the individual sits in a high-backed, uncomfortable chair, staring across a long, scarred mahogany table at a ghost person from their past who has long since moved on, yet remains frozen in the prisoner's dock of the mind. The clock on the wall has stopped, its pendulum held by a thick, obsidian web of grievances. The individual is busy. They are not merely remembering an event, they are curating a case, meticulously gathering evidence, polishing the bitter insults, and refining the narrative of their own victimization. They believe that by holding the other party in this mental dock, they are maintaining justice. They believe that if they just rehearse the argument one more time, if they just find the perfect, crushing retort, the ledger will finally balance. Yet, as they sit in the dim light of their own resentment, they fail to see the truth of their predicament. They are the only ones present in the courtroom. The defendant is merely an echo, a construct of memory that has no power over the present moment. The individual is the judge, the jury, the executioner, and most tragically, the only prisoner. They are paying the price for the crime in their own currency of time, energy, and peace, binding their destiny to the very person they wish to forget. The tragedy is not that the other person wronged them. The tragedy is that they have built a monument to that wrong and chosen to live inside its cold, dark walls. Why does the ego construct such elaborate architectures of resentment? To understand this, one must look at the mechanism of identity. Resentment is a sophisticated defense mechanism designed to preserve the ego's sense of self. By framing oneself as the wronged party, the ego gains a sense of moral superiority and a defined narrative arc. It is easier to be a victim than it is to be a creator, for the victim requires no action, only reaction. Why do we insist on playing the role of the aggrieved? Because it serves as an anchor. The human spirit naturally fears the vast open ocean of total responsibility. By tethering oneself to a past injury, the individual creates a false sense of security, a known path, even if it is a path of suffering. We define ourselves by what was taken from us, rather than what we are capable of bringing forth. How does this process function within the subconscious? The subconscious is a literal servant. It does not analyze the justice of your claims. It merely observes where your focus resides. When you hold a person in the courthouse of your mind, you are providing the subconscious with a steady diet of lack, conflict, and separation. You are essentially instructing your inner reality to remain in a state of confrontation. How can one deconstruct this? One must employ the principle of recursive questioning. When the impulse to resent arises, ask, what is this anger buying me? Is it buying peace? No. Is it buying prosperity? No. It is buying only a temporary, hollow sense of righteousness. The how of dismantling this structure lies in the realization of non-attachment. You must observe the courtroom, recognize the judge as you, and then, with absolute authority, strike the gavel and dissolve the session. You are not forgiving the other for their sake. You are clearing the rubble from your own house so that the architect of your true life can begin the work of construction. In the northern reaches of the kingdom, two brothers, Julian and Marcus, stood before the heavy stone chest that contained their father's legacy. It was a massive inheritance of land, coin, and intellectual property. Yet, a singular, rusted iron key was missing. For 10 years, the brothers lived in the shadow of that chest. Julian, convinced that Marcus had hidden the key, spent his days in the local town square, recounting the story of his betrayal to anyone who would listen. He wrote letters to the High Court. He engaged in legal skirmishes that drained his own coffers, and he became a local spectacle of bitterness. His fields grew fallow, his house fell into disrepair, and he became a man defined entirely by his lack of the key. Marcus, meanwhile, lived in the mansion, equally convinced that Julian had conspired to steal the key before the funeral. He locked himself behind the gates, fearing an intrusion, his days consumed by the constant, grinding machinery of his suspicion. Both brothers held the other in the courtroom of their minds, daily convicting the other of theft, treason, and malice. When the estate lawyers finally arrived to settle the matter after the decade of decay, they found that the chest was not locked at all. It had been left open by the father, but the heavy dust of years had cemented the lid in place, leading both men to assume it was sealed. More importantly, the missing key was found in the pocket of the brothers. Father, a note attached, explained that the key was intended for the brother who showed the initiative to move past the threshold of the past. By remaining stuck in the court of mutual blame, both brothers had succeeded only in bankrupting their own futures, while the wealth sat unclaimed, waiting for a heart that was open enough to receive it. To embody this truth today, you must identify the missing keys you are currently blaming others for withholding. Who is the person you are still mentally suing? What is the apology you are still waiting for, or the recognition you believe is rightfully yours? Recognize that by holding on to this debt, you are not merely tethered to the past. You are dragging the weight of the perpetrator behind you, effectively slowing your own stride toward the horizon. You must make a conscious, definitive choice to walk away from the courtroom. Sit in silence and visualize the person you hold in debt. See them clearly in your mind's eye, not as an adversary, but as a fellow traveler who has perhaps clumsily played a role in your development. Say to them, "I release you from the debt I have imposed upon you. I acknowledge that my supply comes not from your actions, but from the eternal law of the universe." As you speak these words, feel the chains drop away. The energy you have spent prosecuting this case is now yours again, available to build your own legacy. But there is a catch. Once the courtroom is empty and the air is clear, you will find that the space is not merely silent, it is a mirror. Now that you have ceased to define yourself by what others have taken, you must confront the reflection staring back at you. If the court is empty, who is the one left to decide what grows in the garden of your life? In the next chapter, we look into the mirror of the subconscious to see why the world acts exactly as you expect it to, and how to change the image you see before you. The chamber is vast, a gallery of infinite polished glass, where the boundaries between the observer and the observed dissolve into a shimmering, silver haze. An individual stands at the center, his breath hitching as he beholds the gallery walls. Every panel of glass reflects a different facet of his existence. Here, a moment of professional triumph. There, a shadow of lingering regret. Elsewhere, the cold, detached face of a stranger who resembles a person he once loved. He raises a hand to touch the surface, and his reflection does the same, an impeccable synchronization that defies the passage of time. He notices a subtle, maddening paradox. When he approaches the glass with a scowl, convinced that the world is a harsh and unforgiving theater, the reflection responds with an identical expression of defiance. He shouts, and the reflection bellows back, its voice echoing with the exact frequency of his own anger. He demands the world change its expression. He pleads for the reflection to smile, but the glass remains an impartial, unblinking witness to his internal state. He is trapped in a feedback loop of his own making, desperately trying to change the image in the mirror by scrubbing at the glass, while the true source of the reflection, his own face, his own posture, his own spirit, remains hidden from his awareness. He is fighting the effect, entirely oblivious to the fact that he is the cause. Why does the ego cling to the belief that the external world is a separate, autonomous entity that acts upon us, rather than a reflection of our own consciousness? The answer lies in the ego's primary desire for self-preservation through separation. To admit that the outer world is a mirror is to accept absolute terrifying sovereignty. If the world is a mirror, then every injustice, every failure, and every lack we encounter is a manifestation of our own internal blueprint. The ego finds this unbearable, for it prefers the comfort of being a victim, a pawn of circumstance, rather than the architect of its own reality. Why does the subconscious mind operate in this impersonal manner, treating our inner thoughts as commands to be realized in the external world? Because the subconscious is, in its essence, like the soil of a garden. The soil does not discriminate between the seeds of the rose and the seeds of the nightshade. It is designed only to nurture whatever is planted within it. To the subconscious, there is no me or you in the external sense. It perceives only the vibration, the intention, and the emotional resonance of the individual. When one harbors thoughts of resentment toward a neighbor, the subconscious hears the frequency of bitterness and, with absolute neutrality, begins to manifest scenarios of conflict in one's own life. believing this to be the order of the day. How does one master this principle? The how begins with a radical shift in perspective. The recognition that life is not a series of random events, but a precise response to one's internal state. Every person we encounter is a messenger, a carrier of a reflection that informs us of our own subconscious alignment. If you are constantly finding yourself surrounded by takers, it is not because the world is filled with thieves, but because you are vibrating a frequency of lack of belief that you can be depleted. To change the reflection, one must cease the attempt to manipulate the glass. One must retreat to the source, to the inner sanctuary, and alter the seed. When the internal state shifts from I am lacking to I am the source of my own supply, the mirror of the world is left wit. In the fertile valley of Oakhaven, there lived two neighbors, Elias and Theron, both of whom tended to plots of land that were mirror images of one another. Elias was a man who lived in a state of perpetual complaint. He looked at his garden and saw only the weeds that threatened his crops. He spent his days cursing the rain when it fell and weeping when the sun scorched his soil. He believed that the climate was his enemy, that the birds were thieves, and that the earth itself was conspiring against his success. Every day, he walked to the edge of Theron's fence and glared at his neighbor's vibrant, blooming orchards. He has luck, Elias muttered to the sky. He has better soil. He has the favor of the gods. Theron, however, lived by the principle of the mirror. When he walked through his garden, he saw the potential for beauty in every inch of dirt. When the rain fell, he thanked the heavens for the nourishment. When the sun shone, he celebrated the warmth that quickened the roots. He looked at his neighbor's struggling plot with a heart full of silent blessings, acknowledging that the same sun and rain that favored him were available to all. As the seasons passed, the difference became undeniable. Theron's land became a lush, verdant paradise, while Elias's plot withered into dust. Elias eventually collapsed on the fence line, exhausted by his battle against the elements. Theron approached him gently. "Elias," he said, "you have been working so hard to fight the world, yet you have forgotten that the garden is not the cause of your harvest. You are. The garden is only the field upon which your thoughts are written. Stop fighting the weeds in the dirt and start planting the seeds in your heart." Elias, for the first time, looked not at the ground, but at his own hands. He realized that the harvest he had been reaping was the only one he had been planting, the harvest of his own desperate, hungry, and resentful thoughts. The mirror of the earth had simply been Doi. To embody the mirror principle today, you must perform a reflection audit. Choose one recurring frustration in your life, a specific conflict with a colleague, a sense of being perpetually undervalued, or a repeating financial struggle. Instead of looking outward to blame the external circumstance, look inward and ask, what does this reflection tell me about my own internal state? If you feel overlooked, ask where you are failing to appreciate your own value. If you feel taken from, ask where you are failing to honor your own boundaries. This practice is the beginning of true sovereignty. You are no longer at the mercy of the world. You are the one setting the tone for the encounter. As you go through your day, practice the art of silent blessing. When you see someone succeeding, do not let the shadow of jealousy cross your heart. Instead, say, "I rejoice in your good, for your success is the echo of my own abundance." Watch how the mirror begins to shift. You will notice that the people who were once difficult suddenly become accommodating, or better yet, they disappear, replaced by those who align with your new, higher frequency. You are the source. The world is the shadow. But even as the reflection begins to clear, a new question arises. If we are indeed the creators of our reality, why do we still feel the sting of the world's chaos? What happens when the world's reflection is particularly loud, particularly dissonant, or particularly painful? How do we maintain our internal posture when the mirror shows us a storm? We move next into the realm of the impersonal love, the most potent protective shield a creator can possess. We shall learn why to love the divine in others is the ultimate strategy for ensuring your own unwavering peace. The city plaza at midday is a cacophony of human friction. A torrential downpour has forced hundreds of strangers into the narrow, sheltered confines of a subway entrance, creating a bottleneck of damp wool, impatient exhales, and sharp, defensive glances. A woman, elegant and poised, finds herself shoved by a man rushing to catch a departing train. He offers no apology, his face a mask of harried, selfish preoccupation. In the old world, the world of the battle, the woman's internal response would be immediate and burning, a flicker of righteous indignation, a silent condemnation of his rudeness, and a tightening of her own energetic field to protect her space. But watch her closely. She does not recoil. She does not sharpen her gaze into a weapon. Instead, she pauses, her posture remaining fluid and unbothered, as if she were standing in a sun-drenched meadow rather than a subterranean corridor. She looks at the man not with the judgment of a victim, but with the calm, detached clarity of an observer watching a leaf drift upon a stream. She radiates a stillness that seems to ripple outward, causing the people around her to subtly adjust their own frantic rhythms. This is the paradox of the master. To be surrounded by the chaos of lower vibrations, yet to remain entirely untouched, anchored in a realm where offense is a concept that has lost its power to penetrate. What is this impersonal love, and why is it so frequently misunderstood as a form of detachment or coldness? To deconstruct this, one must first recognize the distinction between personal affection and spiritual stance. Personal affection is reactive. It is an emotional exchange governed by the ego's criteria. Do you like me? Do you agree with me? Do you serve me? Impersonal love, however, is a decree of the soul. It is the recognition that every individual is, at their core, a divine entity, regardless of the temporary masks of anger, confusion, or hostility they may be wearing. Why does the ego struggle to adopt this stance? Because the ego thrives on the concept of the enemy. If we are all connected in the divine, the ego loses its ability to rank itself, to judge, and to separate. The why of our suffering is often found in our insistence on taking everything personally. When we believe that another person's behavior is an act directed at us, we grant them authority over our emotional state. We become puppets on the strings of others' moods. How, then, does one maintain this impersonal love in the face of blatant provocation? It is achieved through a recursive mental shift. Ask yourself, who is the I that is being offended? Is it your divine essence, which is eternal and untouchable? Or is it your ego, which is brittle and demanding? The how of this practice involves the active, conscious choice to see the divine in the other. When you meet criticism, do not meet it with counter-criticism. Meet it with the internal declaration, the divine in me blesses the divine in you. By doing so, you refuse to meet the other person on the level of their drama. You remain on the high ground. You do not absorb their friction because you have chosen not to participate in the conflict. This is not weakness. It is the ultimate expression of spiritual dominance. There existed in the capital a woman named Elena, a visionary who worked within a company overseen by a notoriously caustic executive named Marcus. Marcus was a man who seemed to derive his authority from the destruction of others' confidence. He was prone to public outbursts, pointed criticism, and the systematic undermining of his subordinates' ideas. For years, Elena lived in a state of high alert, her mind constantly occupied by the fear of his next maneuver. She was, in the language of the game, a perpetual casualty of his battlefield. Then, Elena changed her stance. She decided to treat Marcus as a teacher of non-resistance. Every time he launched into a tirade, instead of spiraling into defense or resentment, she would anchor herself in the silent, invisible truth. He is not attacking me. He is merely revealing his own internal unrest. and I am the mirror he is using to attempt to find stability. She began to look past the shouting, past the biting words, and focus her mind on the idea of his inherent divinity, a concept he had long ago buried under layers of ego. She stopped defending her work and instead began to listen for the underlying need in his complaints. When he lashed out, she would offer a calm, neutral acknowledgement, maintaining a frequency of absolute goodwill. The change was not immediate, but it was absolute. Within 3 months, Marcus, who had found no resistance to bounce off of, became unmoored. The game of the office changed because Elena had withdrawn her participation from the battle. Marcus eventually grew quiet, his aggression failing to find a target. He eventually began to approach her for advice, his behavior shifting from obstruction to collaboration. Elena had not changed Marcus. She had changed her relationship to him, and in doing so, she had neutralized the very force that had once held her prosperity in check. To embody this truth, you must begin to practice the silent blessing throughout your day. Choose a difficult person in your life, the driver who cuts you off, the cashier who is unkind, the partner who is distant. Before you react, take a breath and silently repeat, "The divine in me blesses the divine in you." Do not expect them to change immediately. Do not even perform this with the intent of fixing them. Perform it as an act of personal hygiene for your own consciousness. This practice keeps your channel clear. It prevents the hooks of other people's drama from snagging your own frequency. It is the spiritual armor that ensures you remain the architect of your own peace. As you practice this, notice the lightness that follows. The anger that once burned in your chest will begin to feel like a distant, irrelevant hum. You will find that you have more energy to devote to your own dreams because you are no longer spending it on policing the behavior of others. But there is a hidden, more potent danger that arises when you begin to walk this higher plane. As your frequency rises, you will inevitably look at the success of others and find your own old, dormant patterns of jealousy rising to the surface. It is a subtle poison, one that masquerades as fairness, but acts as a wall against your own abundance. In the next chapter, we address the most expensive emotion you can possibly afford, and how to transmute the sting of another's success into the fuel for your own. The evening air is thick with the scent of jasmine and the soft, ambient glow of a city skyline that seems to promise everything to everyone. In a quiet, high-rise apartment, a person sits before a glowing device, scrolling through the curated snapshots of others, lives a promotion announced, a new home acquired, a celebration captured in vibrant color. As the images pass, a familiar, cold sting pulses in the center of their chest. It is a subtle, agonizing, tightening, a recognition of someone else's abundance that, in the viewer's mind, represents their own personal depletion. The paradox is profound. The person feels as though they are observing the world, yet they are actually locked in a solitary confinement of their own making. By resenting the prosperity of a neighbor, they are signaling to the subconscious that such prosperity is an object of conflict, not a possibility for the self. The screen in their hands has become a dark mirror. They are looking at the success of another and, through the alchemy of jealousy, turning it into a poison that numbs their own potential. They are standing in the middle of a harvest, yet they are starving because they are too busy counting the sheaves in a field that does not belong to them. Why does the ego prioritize jealousy as a primary emotional response to another's success? It is because the ego is inherently competitive, operating from a foundational belief in scarcity. The ego whispers a catastrophic lie. If there is only so much gold in the world and another has found a treasure, then my share is diminished. This is the logic of the closed system. Jealousy is the ego's frantic attempt to maintain a hierarchy of me versus them, ensuring that if one cannot be the leader, one can at least be the primary sufferer of the disparity. Why is this the most expensive emotion one can afford? It is expensive because it is an energetic keep-out sign posted upon the doors of one's own subconscious. When you feel a pang of jealousy, you are sending a direct command to your internal laboratory. We are not in the business of success. We are in the business of lamenting the success of others. Consequently, the subconscious impersonal and obedient shuts down the pathways that lead to that specific variety of abundance. You are literally bankrupting your own future to pay for the momentary, bitter satisfaction of comparing yourself to a shadow. How does one dismantle this destructive mechanism? One must apply the power of recursive inquiry. When the sting of envy rises, ask, what am I actually craving? Is it the promotion? Or is it the feeling of worthiness? Is it the house? Or the feeling of security? Once you identify that the desire is for the feeling, you realize that the other person's success is not a theft of your joy, but a confirmation that the joy you seek is possible. The how of transformation lies in the prosperity pivot. You must consciously transmute the jealousy into a blessing. By rejoicing in the success of others, you align your frequency with the vibration of success itself. You are telling your subconscious, we are in the business of abundance now. You are moving from the frequency of competition, which is static and draining, to the frequency of creation, which is infinite and expansive. In the fertile valley of the three rivers, two farmers, Silas and Bram, cultivated adjacent fields. Silas was a man of constant observation. He spent his mornings peering over the hedge, noting the speed at which Bram's wheat grew and the height of his stalks. Whenever Bram achieved a bountiful harvest, Silas would retreat to his own fields with a heart full of resentment. He would curse the soil, claiming the valley gods favored Bram over him. He focused so intently on the unfairness of Bram's success that he neglected the irrigation of his own crops. He spent his days in a state of calculation, measuring his lack against Bram's overflow. Bram, meanwhile, was a man who worked with the rhythm of the seasons. He would often see Silas watching him, but he never understood the bitterness behind the gaze. When Bram noticed Silas's crops beginning to yellow from neglect, he would offer tips on the soil, yet Silas would only turn away, his heart too hardened by envy to accept assistance. One season, a severe drought swept through the valley. Bram's fields, nurtured by a consistent, appreciative focus and a willingness to share his knowledge, remained remarkably resilient. Silas's fields, neglected and cursed by his constant state of comparison, were decimated. Silas eventually lost his land, a victim of his own inability to see that the world was vast enough for two harvests. He had treated the valley as a zero-sum game, convinced that for him to win, Bram had to lose. He did not realize that the rain that fell on Bram's field was the same rain that had been available to his own, had he only been looking at the sky instead of his neighbor's barn. Bram had become a master of his harvest because he stayed in his own garden, while Silas had become a pauper of his own making, bankrupting his life in the pursuit of envying another. To embody this truth today, perform the prosperity pivot every time you feel the sting of envy. When you see someone who has the very thing you are working to achieve, a better job, a beautiful relationship, a greater platform, stop the impulse to compare. Instead, deliberately say aloud, I rejoice in your good. Your success is a sign that my success is near. I bless your abundance, and I know that what the divine has done for you, it now does for me and more. This is the ultimate hack for the subconscious. By aligning yourself with the frequency of their victory, you are not cheering for them. You are activating the blueprint of that same victory within your own life. Subscribe to this channel to join a collective committed to the law of abundance, and like this video to signal to the universe that you are ready to stop spending your energy on envy and start investing it in your own harvest. As you practice this, watch how the mirror of the world begins to change. The people who were once competitors will start to feel like companions on the road to success. You will find that you no longer feel the need to be better than, because you know you are as one with. But there is a deeper layer to this surrender. If we are no longer competing, if we are no longer resenting, then how do we actually receive? How do we move from the state of wanting to the state of having? We move now to the alchemy of release, the precise, rhythmic act of letting go of the old ledgers to make room for the new miracles. You have cleared the garden of weeds. Now, you must learn how to sow the seeds of your own future. Imagine a weary traveler trekking across a sun-scorched desert, draped in a heavy, elaborate coat made of leaden chains and rusted iron keys. Every step he takes is a labor, a negotiation with gravity and exhaustion. He carries this burden not because he needs the protection of the metal, but because he has convinced himself that these chains are the story of his life, his past grievances, his unpaid debts, his unfulfilled expectations. He arrives at an oasis, a shimmering pool of pure, cool water that promises to quench his thirst and restore his vitality. Yet, he stands at the edge of the water, unable to kneel, unable to reach, because the weight of the coat pulls him backward, anchoring him to the burning sands he has already crossed. He is the portrait of the human condition, a creature capable of drinking from the infinite, yet paralyzed by the attachment to the finite. The paradox is haunting. He believes he is preserving his identity by holding on to the weight of what has been, unaware that this very weight is the only thing preventing him from experiencing the bounty of what is. The oasis remains, indifferent to his struggle, offering everything while he clings to the iron that ensures he receives nothing. To reach the water, the traveler must commit the ultimate act of perceived betrayal against his own history. He must let the coat fall into the dust, acknowledging that the chains he once cherished as his strength have become the shackles of his starvation. What is the alchemy of release? And why does the soul fear the moment of surrender more than the endurance of suffering? At its philosophical foundation, release is the process of transmuting stuck energy, grief, resentment, or attachment back into the fluid stream of life force. It is the recognition that nothing in the universe is meant to be static. All is motion. All is flow. Why does the psyche resist this fundamental law? It is due to the illusion of control. We believe that by holding on to a grudge, a debt, or a memory of betrayal, we are maintaining a record of justice. We think, if I let go of this pain, the person who caused it wins. We believe that our resentment is a form of payment, a currency we are saving to balance the scales. This is a profound error of recursive thinking. If we ask, what is the true cost of this ledger? We discover it is our own life force. By fixating on the debt, we are not punishing the debtor. We are starving the creditor. How does the process of release function as true alchemy? Alchemy is not the destruction of matter, but its transformation. When you release a person from the debt you have mentally held them in, you are not simply discarding the memory. You are transmuting the energy of that bond. You are converting the stagnant weight of the past into the fuel for the present. The how of this practice requires a radical, uncompromising honesty. One must view the debt not as a lost treasure, but as a leak in one's own vessel. The moment you decide to stop looking for repayment from the source of your pain, you open the valve. You are not forgiving in the passive, sentimental sense. You are reclaiming your own power. You are saying, I choose my prosperity over my righteousness. This shift in consciousness is the philosopher's stone, the catalyst that turns the lead of past struggle into the gold of present opportunity. In the imperial city, there was an architect named Valerius, who was commissioned to build the greatest spire the world had ever seen. He began with grand visions, but early in the project, his lead contractor absconded with the initial funds, leaving Valerius in a state of ruin and public humiliation. For years, Valerius did not build. He stood before his foundation, scribbling endless letters of accusation, drafting imaginary lawsuits, and obsessing over the exact amount of gold he had lost. His life became a monument to a crime. He lived in a tent on the construction site, watching the foundation crack and the weeds grow. his hands shaking with the phantom weight of his rage. A passerby, a master builder from a distant land, observed Valerius's decay. He asked, "Why do you sit among the rubble of a dream that was meant for the sky?" Valerius pointed to the empty space where his gold should have been and wept, "I cannot build until he pays what is owed." The master builder shook his head and said, "You are a master of stone, yet you are currently a slave to a ghost. You believe the contractor took your gold, but look closer. He took your time, your focus, and your brilliance. By holding on to the debt, you are not waiting for the gold to return. You are ensuring that no new stone is ever laid." Valerius looked at the rusted, abandoned tools. He realized that every day he spent nursing the injury was a day he was not being an architect. He made a vow. He would stop looking for the contractor and start looking at the sky. He gathered his team, instructed them to clear the weeds, and began to build a new design, even more magnificent than the first. He didn't ask for the old gold. He manifested new wealth through the execution of his craft. The original contractor eventually faded into the obscurity of his own failures, while Valerius' spire pierced the clouds, a testament to a man who had the courage to stop counting the costs and start measuring the height of his reach. He had achieved the alchemy of release. He had used the memory of the betrayal as a reminder of his own capability to recover, turning a deficit into a grand, ascending victory. To embody the alchemy of release, you must perform the mental clearing. Find a quiet space and physically represent the ledger you have been keeping. Identify one person or situation where you feel you are owed, be it money, an apology, time, or recognition. See them in your mind and speak the words of release. I release you from the debt I have imposed upon you. I no longer look to you for my peace. My supply is infinite, and my past is a closed chapter. I am here to build my future, not to balance the old accounts. Feel the weight of the coat slide off your shoulders. Observe the lightness in your breath. This is the sound of the dam finally cracking. You are now standing in an empty space, a blank canvas where the architecture of your life is waiting to be drawn. But how do we ensure that this space is filled with the right materials? How do we move from the negative space of release into the positive command of creation? We have learned to let go. Now we must learn to speak. In the next chapter, we enter the realm of the word of power, the precise, rhythmic language of the Creator. We will learn why your words are not just descriptions of your reality, but the very tools that construct it. Prepare yourself, for we are moving from the silence of release into the thundering command of the future. The chamber is shrouded in a profound, expectant silence, the kind that precedes the breaking of a storm or the birth of a star. In the center stands a solitary figure, eyes closed, breath steady, surrounded by the heavy, invisible atmosphere of a life currently defined by struggle. The walls of this room are not made of stone, but of habits, of past defeats, and of the whispered, fearful descriptions of a reality that has long gone stale. The individual begins to speak not to the air, but to the very fabric of existence itself. The voice is low, resonant, and unwavering. As the first rhythmic declaration leaves their lips, the air in the room seems to shiver. The shadows in the corners lose their weight, and the oppressive gravity of the past begins to dissolve into a crystalline vibration. This is the central paradox of the creative life. The individual spends years trying to change the world by wrestling with objects, people, and circumstances, only to discover that the world is entirely deaf to their efforts. Yet, the moment they align their words with the law, the world which moments before appeared solid and immovable, suddenly becomes as pliable as clay in the hands of a master. The atmosphere shifts, not because the environment has changed, but because the speaker has ceased to describe the problem and has begun to command the solution. They are no longer a victim of the script, they are the playwright, and the universe is the stage waiting for the first word of the new performance to be uttered. Why does the spoken word possess such terrifying and beautiful sovereignty over the material world? To deconstruct this, one must understand that the word is the ultimate instrument of manifestation. We operate under the delusion that words are merely descriptors, labels we apply to a pre-existing, static reality. In truth, the word is the cause of the reality. The word is the bridge between the invisible, infinite potential of the source and the visible, finite manifestation of the form. Why does the ego struggle to grasp this? Because the ego is conditioned to observe before it speaks. It believes in the evidence of the senses, the bank statement, the empty chair, the silent phone, and it uses its speech to reinforce these observations. If the bank is empty, the ego says, "I have no money." It believes it is telling the truth. However, in the law, this is a lie. It is a description of a temporary shadow, and by speaking it, the individual gives that shadow the authority to persist. How does one reclaim the power of the word? It requires a recursive shift in the architecture of thought. Ask yourself, am I describing the shadow, or am I commanding the light? The how of this practice involves the transition from the language of I hope and I wish to the language of I am and I command. You are not asking the universe for favor. You are reminding the law of its own nature. The word is a vibration that organizes energy. When you speak a rhythmic, precise declaration, you are aligning your entire subconscious frequency with the outcome you desire. You are removing the friction of doubt. The universe, which is fundamentally impersonal and obedient, cannot distinguish between a word spoken in faith and a condition already existing in form. By speaking as though the harvest is already yours, you force the atoms of your reality to reconfigure themselves to match the command. You become a magnet for the very state you have articulated. In the high mountain fortress of Athelgard, there lived a weaver named Alara, who was tasked with creating the royal tapestries. For many years, she labored in frustration, her hands always describing the fraying threads, the shortage of silk, and the dimness of the light. Her tapestries were lackluster, reflecting the poverty of her complaints. She spent her days saying, "The thread is broken, and the light is failing," and sure enough, her work was a tangled mess of broken patterns. One day, an aged master weaver came to the fortress. He did not touch the loom. He only sat and watched Alara. He heard her constant narration of failure. He stopped her gently and said, "Alara, you are not weaving a tapestry. You are weaving a spell of decay. Your tongue is the shuttle, and the reality you see is the thread. If you weave lack into the loom with every breath, do not be surprised that the fabric you produce is thin and tattered." Alara was struck by the simplicity of the error. She began to experiment. Instead of narrating the mess, she began to speak the perfection she intended. As she threaded the silk, she whispered, "The pattern is perfect, the supply is infinite, the light is clear." She spoke these words not as a wish, but as a command to the very fibers of the silk. Within days, the atmosphere of her workshop shifted. The threads stopped snapping. The sunlight seemed to find her loom with newfound intensity. The tapestry she created was a masterpiece of gold and azure, glowing with the energy of the words she had woven into its creation. She had learned the ancient secret. The world is not something you weave on, it is something you weave with. The reality of the masterpiece existed in the command before it ever appeared on the loom. To embody the power of the spoken word today, you must curate your internal and external vocabulary. Identify the problem narratives you repeat to yourself and others, the ways you describe your financial state, your loneliness, or your struggles. Replace these with precise, rhythmic declarations. Do not say, "I am struggling to find clients." Say, "My services are divinely guided to those who are ready to receive, and the path is clear." Do not say, "I am tired." Say, "I am energized by the infinite power of the source, and my capacity to create is renewed every moment." Make these declarations your internal soundtrack. Speak them with the authority of one who knows the law, not the plea of one who hopes it is true. You are the architect of your existence. Ensure your language reflects the grandeur of the house you are building. As you practice, watch the shift. The world will begin to respond to your commands, sometimes in ways that are swift, sometimes in ways that are miraculous. But as your world stabilizes and your power grows, a new, more profound challenge emerges. The ego, having failed to stop you with doubt, will attempt one final, desperate protest. It will tell you that you are being arrogant, that you are being delusional, and that you are losing your grip on the reality everyone else accepts. In the next chapter, we descend into the heart of the ego's rebellion. We will learn how to recognize this final protest for what it is, and why the discomfort you feel is actually the sound of the dam cracking. Are you prepared to face the final threshold of your own transformation? The threshold is crossed in the quietest of moments, not with a fanfare of trumpets, but with a sudden, unsettling stillness that permeates the marrow. The individual has walked the path of release, commanded their reality with the word, and cleared the garden of the old, choking weeds of resentment. Yet, as they stand at the precipice of their new existence, the air around them grows thin and cold. It is the hour of the final protest, the moment when the old self, the ego, recognizes that its dissolution is imminent. It arrives as a whisper in the dark, a phantom voice that mimics the person's own thoughts, warning them that they are drifting into madness, arrogance, or a perilous form of delusion. The paradox is visceral. The closer one moves toward absolute alignment with the divine law, the more intense the internal turbulence becomes. The mind, formerly accustomed to the predictable, limited geography of struggle, recoils at the vast, featureless horizon of true abundance. It is a sensory claustrophobia. The heart beats against the ribcage like a trapped bird, and the senses begin to relay reports of imminent collapse. A sense that if one does not return to the safety of the battle, to the familiar, worn-out patterns of worry and control, the entire structure of the self will shatter. It is the ego's final, desperate gamble, a frantic attempt to convince the master that the chains were never chains, but the very armor that kept them alive. Why does the ego mount such a fierce, final rebellion when the individual is on the verge of breakthrough? To deconstruct this, one must understand the ego not as an evil adversary, but as a mechanical safety system. The ego is the repository of every fear, every past limitation, and every survival lesson the individual has ever learned. It thrives on the familiar, no matter how painful that familiarity may be. To the ego, the known, even if it is a known state of lack, is synonymous with safety. The unknown, the realm of infinite potential, is perceived as death. Why does the protest manifest as a feeling of wrongness or weakness? It is because the ego is adept at perverting truth. When the individual chooses to forgive, the ego whispers, "You are being weak, you are letting them win." When the individual chooses to command their reality, the ego sneers, "You are being arrogant. Who are you to assume such power?" This is the ego's reverse logic, a recursive trap designed to pull the individual back into the comfort of the battle. By framing the act of sovereignty as a failure of character, the ego ensures the individual retreats into the cycle of struggle, where the ego feels useful and necessary. How does one navigate this final protest without being consumed by it? The how begins with the practice of observational detachment. One must recognize the voice of the ego as a passenger, not the driver. When the discomfort arises, the anxiety, the urge to doubt, the pull to return to the old ways, one must adopt a posture of absolute calm inquiry. Ask, who is feeling this fear? It is the ego, protecting a lack that no longer exists. The mastery of this phase requires a stoic acceptance of the discomfort. Understand that this sensation is not a sign of failure. It is the sound of the dam cracking. It is the kinetic energy of old, stagnant habits being dismantled. The discomfort is not a warning. It is the sensation of growth, the friction of the soul breaking free from the cocoon of the limited self. You do not fight the ego. You simply observe it until it grows quiet, starved of the belief that once fed it. In the annals of the ancient guilds, there is recorded the tale of Julian, a scholar who sought to master the language of the stars. For years, he labored in the shadows, his mind cluttered with the debris of 1,000 intellectual arguments. He sought the great alignment, a state of consciousness where his word would command the elements. Through years of discipline, he reached the threshold of this power. He stood in the great observatory of the sun, ready to speak the command that would secure his legacy and his prosperity. In that final moment, the silence was shattered by a cacophony of inner doubt. A torrent of voices, the voices of his father, his old rivals, his own fears flooded his mind. "You are an imposter," they hissed. "You have achieved nothing. The world will mock you. You are losing your senses." Julian felt the floor beneath him tremble. He felt his heart falter, the cold sweat of a man facing the abyss. The ego showed him scenes of his past failures, amplified to a terrifying, cinematic clarity. He reached for his old, bitter comfort, the familiar anger that had sustained him for a lifetime. He nearly turned back. But then, he paused. He watched the panic rising in his chest, and instead of identifying with it, he looked at it as one looks at a storm on the horizon. He realized that the storm was not his reality. It was merely the echo of his past departure. He did not fight the voices. He simply stood in the center of the roar and whispered, "I see you. You are the shadow of who I was, but you have no power over who I am becoming." As he spoke, the voices reached a fever pitch and then abruptly vanished into an absolute, vacuum-like silence. The ego, having exhausted its inventory of fear, fell dormant. Julian spoke his command, and the observatory began to glow with the light of a new, commanded reality. He had passed the final threshold, not by vanquishing his fear, but by refusing to give it the crown of his conviction. To embody this truth today, you must prepare your heart for the threshold turbulence. The next time you find yourself on the verge of a significant shift, a breakthrough in your career, a deepening of your relationships, or an expansion of your resources, and you suddenly feel an inexplicable wave of doubt or wrongness, do not retreat. Recognize it immediately as the ego's final protest. Say to the voice, aloud or in the silent sanctuary of your mind, that is the ego trying to protect a lack that no longer exists. I observe you, I acknowledge you, but I do not obey you. Sit with the discomfort. Breathe through the sensation of the dam cracking. Do not look for the safe shore of your past habits. You are the master of your consciousness, and you are currently transmuting the heavy metals of your old identity into the pure gold of your sovereignty. Like this video to seal this commitment to the threshold, and subscribe to our channel as we prepare for our final transition. You have successfully dismantled the battle, the ledger, the cage of resentment, and the habit of jealousy. You have learned to speak with the authority of the source. You are now standing on the other side of the protest, in the clear, radiant light of a reality that is ready to be inhabited. But what is the final, ultimate truth that binds all these principles into a singular, unwavering lifestyle? We move now into the final chapter, the summation of the journey, where we shall declare the birth of the master of their own world. The threshold is behind us. The infinite awaits. The dawn breaks over the horizon of a new reality, casting a long, golden illumination across a landscape that was once a wilderness of struggle and now stands as a cultivated garden of potential. The individual, the one who has traveled the long road from the cold, sterile office of resentment to this moment of absolute clarity, stands upon the high ground of their own consciousness. They are no longer checking the horizon for adversaries, nor are they scouring the past for evidence of their own victimization. The air is vibrant with the hum of the infinite, and the weight that once tethered them to the desert of their own making has been utterly dissolved. They look upon the world, and for the first time, they see it not as a battleground to be conquered, but as a mirror to be directed. They observe the people in their life, the colleagues, the loved ones, the strangers, and they see them as participants in a grand, harmonious dance of energy, where every movement is a reflection of a deeper, divine arrangement. They understand that they have not just arrived at a destination, but have awakened to a state of being where their internal posture determines the outer experience. The paradox is complete. In surrendering the need to control the world, they have gained the power to create it. They are the master of their own world, standing at the center of a life that is no longer happening to them, but flowing from them. What is the final, ultimate truth that integrates every principle of the spiritual law? It is the realization of unity, the understanding that the observer, the observed, and the law governing their interaction are, in essence, one and the same. The why of this integration is the need for the individual to move from a state of dualism, the me vs. the world conflict, to a state of non-dualistic sovereignty. Why do we struggle for so long? Because we treat our consciousness as if it were a spectator, observing a pre-existing reality rather than a participant crafting that reality in real time. How does one maintain this mastery once the journey's intensity begins to fade into the rhythm of daily life? It is achieved through the practice of practical alignment, the constant, unwavering commitment to the awareness that there is no one to change but oneself. How does this look in the mechanics of the psyche? It is the recursive loop of gratitude and declaration. When a challenge arises, the master does not ask, "How can I fight this?" but rather, "What in my consciousness is this reflecting, and how can I elevate my frequency to shift it?" This is not an intellectual exercise. It is an energetic posture. The master understands that to bless the external is to heal the internal, and that every act of non-resistance is a reinforcement of their own boundless power. Why does this lead to infinite supply? Because the master has transcended the fear of lack. They have seen that supply is not a static object to be acquired, but a current to be maintained. By keeping the channel clear, by releasing all attachments to the how or the who of their good, they become a conduit through which the universe can express its inexhaustible nature. Mastery is not the attainment of a static peak. It is the mastery of the climb, the ability to walk through the world with an open hand and an ironclad faith. In the center of the great valley, there lived a figure known only as the Master Gardener, who did not own a single tool, yet his gardens were the envy of the entire region. People traveled from distant kingdoms to ask him for the secret to his abundance. His overflowing harvests, his vibrant, healthy trees, and the persistent serenity of his estate. They searched for hidden irrigation systems, for magic fertilizers, or for special, ancient seeds. The master gardener would lead them to a simple, weathered bench in the middle of his garden and say, "You seek the method, but you do not see the gardener." He explained that he did not cultivate the garden by fighting the weeds, for he knew that the weeds were merely a byproduct of the soil's current state. He did not beg the sun for warmth, nor did he curse the rain for flooding the beds. Instead, he spent his hours in a state of deep, resonant alignment with the garden's essence. He spoke to the seeds with the authority of the harvest he intended to see, and he walked through his rows with the gratitude of a man who already held the bounty in his hands. When a guest once complained that a neighbor's blight had spread to his garden, the master gardener simply smiled and began to sing a melody of health and vitality, blessing his neighbor's land as he blessed his own. The guest was baffled. "But you do not protect your borders?" he asked. The master gardener replied, "There are no borders where the law is concerned. I do not define my garden by what I am keeping out. I define it by what I am calling in. If I am aligned with life, life must manifest, and there is no room for blight in a garden that is saturated with the vibration of growth." The guest left, Realizing that the master gardener's secret was not in his hands, but in his heart, he had become the garden itself, and the harvest was simply the manifestation of his own peace. To embody this truth today, you must accept your role as the master of your own world. You are the one who dictates the frequency, the one who plants the seed, and the one who commands the harvest. Begin each morning with the declaration, "There is no one to change but myself. As I shift my vision, the world shifts its form. I am the source, and my supply is as infinite as the law that sustains it." Do not look to the external world for validation that you are on the right path. Look to the lightness in your own spirit and the peace in your own heart. This is your birthright. You have moved from the battle to the game, from the grudge to the grace, and from the victim to the creator. Walk forward now with the confidence of one who knows the rules and the peace of one who has mastered their own response. Leave a comment below to solidify this transition. I release the old ledgers. I bless all channels of my good. I am ready for my infinite supply. You are no longer waiting for a miracle, for you have become the miracle in motion. Your life is the unfolding of the divine order, and you are its primary architect. The threshold is behind you, and the horizon is wide open. Go in peace, beloved, for the law is in your hands, and the law never fails, and so it is.